This episode of EDUCA is brought to you by the Denver Public Library, proud sponsor of today's conversation and your partner in learning all summer long. Don't miss out on Summer of Adventure, a fun, free program for kids and teens to read, make, and explore. Just for signing up, you'll get a backpack full of goodies, including discounted tickets to Rapids and Rockies games. Complete your adventure guide and earn free tickets to the Denver Zoo. Head to summerofadventure.org to get started. That's summerofadventure.org.
Hello, friends and families. Welcome to the EDUCA DPS podcast, where we inform families and connect communities. My name is Javier Ibarra, your host of the English version of this podcast. And today, in the EDUCA studio, we have Kat Lovejoy, by far one of the best last names we've had on the show. She is a bilingual community connector with the Denver Children's Advocacy Center. Long name. We're going to hear more about that. Kat, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can you just real quick tell us or summarize what are some of the services that the organization that you work for provides? What do you enjoy most about your job?
Yeah. So the description's in the name, Center for Denver Children's Advocacy Center. That means every county has an advocacy center that investigates abuse or neglect for that county. And we do it for Denver because we're Denver Children's Advocacy Center. So that's the first thing we do is if there's a case of abuse or neglect, we're going to investigate in a way that's supportive to the children and to the family, the families that haven't, harmed the child. From there, we offer those kids therapy, not only to kids who've been through abuse and neglect, but we have a pretty big therapy team, so we can offer therapy to any kid in the Denver metro area that may have been through some sort of traumatic experience. So immigration is one of those, bullying, experiencing domestic violence, things like that. And then we have our third program, which is more of what I do, which is go into the community, partner with organizations, and bring them the tools that they might need in their community to help prevent abuse and talk about well-being and our programs as well.
We were talking offline, and I think it was very serendipitous, the journey that I've had coming to the studio here today, because I've actually done a little more research than normal when we have guests on about the topic, about what we're going to get into. So I'm pretty excited about this conversation. And for our listeners, stick around because it's going to get pretty good. Today, our conversation revolves around the understanding the factors that causes stress among youth, and more importantly, how to help them survive something as exhausting as stress. A little bit about our topic. Teenage stress is a growing concern in today's fast-paced world. Pressures from social media, family expectations, and peer relationships can overwhelm teens, leading to anxiety, sleep issues, and low self-esteem. As they navigate identity, academic challenges, and emotional growth, many teens struggle to cope in healthy ways. Stress during adolescence can affect mental health and development, making early support essential. Encouraging open communication, fostering balance between responsibility and rest, and promoting physical activity and mindfulness can help reduce stress. Creating a supportive environment at home and at school is the key to helping teenagers manage stress and build long-term resilience. So with that, Kat, I want to ask you, what are the most common sources of stress for teenagers today?
Yeah, so you mentioned some of it already. There's a lot of general stresses that are going to affect any kid. Things like family stress or tension, obviously school and grades, friendships. Then we have, big things that are big changes for kids, like changing schools or moving. And then anything happening in the community that's causing stress in the community can also be stressful for kids. Things like rhetoric around immigration, or if they're an LGBTQ kiddo or something happens in their neighborhood, that's going to cause stress for any kid. And it's important to recognize, like you just mentioned, that these kids are going through a lot of physical and mental changes, right? So they are experiencing changes in hormones, which is going to make their emotions more, I use the word volatile. It sounds a little bit negative, but basically it means they're going to have bigger emotional reactions, but also they're going to have more of them, or feel really happy and really sad more frequently. They're going to fluctuate more, which affects directly their well-being, right? Their mental well-being. And at the same time, their prefrontal cortex, big word, but the part of our brain that solves problems, that realizes what cause and effect looks like, is just starting to develop. And that pushes them to also start thinking about, well, what are my values? Who am I? What do I believe? All of those things, those big emotions, and then deciding who I am are going to make kids, one, they're super important for their development and growth and maturity and becoming adults. And they also make them more vulnerable to stress and anxiety on a daily basis.
So it's been a long time since I was a teenager, quite a bit of years.
Me too.
But I can only imagine what our teenagers are facing today. When I was a teenager, Facebook had come out my senior year of high school. Okay. And so before that, I really didn't get into it. And I didn't have a Facebook until maybe sophomore year of college. Yeah. Right. And so I think that, I kind of escaped that sort of pressure. I think at first it was cool to connect with your friends online, but very quickly, I could see how if you were still developing, like you said, right? Your values and all the stresses that are going on in the world, and then you were trying to compare yourself to what other people or other students, teenagers are doing. Like, I can only imagine you're getting hit from all sorts of directions on top of the advertising for whatever, we didn't even talk about that. Yeah. And so I think definitely. It's super intense to be a teenager today, and so I sympathize greatly with them. Yeah. But for the purposes of the next question that I have for you, what ways do peer relationships, right, the way we interact with our fellow friends, colleagues, other students, contribute to stress in adolescence? Yeah. So I always like to think of it as, even as an adult, friendships are stressful, right? I want to learn how to care for a friend well. I want to learn how to share and listen and treat them well. I'm a little concerned if they like me or not, right? Right. And I'm an adult. So those are stressful things for anyone. Right. And then we have to remember these big changes that are happening to teens, right? One, lots of hormones, lots of big reactions. Yes. They're gonna maybe overreact to things or even underreact to things. Their well-being is gonna be affected more by these friendships, on top of the idea of I'm building my identity. I'm trying to figure out what my own self-image is. And so the opinions and the way my friends treat me are going to have even more weight than they would if I just was trying to make a friend as an adult or even as an elementary schooler. I was having a conversation with my sister-in-law about her kiddo. So her youngest, is about to graduate high school in a few days or so. And we were talking about sports and how beneficial sports have been throughout his life. And she was telling me, the reason why they went all in through travel sports and rec leagues and clubs and stuff like that is, she said, I know my sons aren't going to be D1 players, but the things that they learn playing sports is so unique and so valuable that it's worth the investment and the time. Yeah. Right. And so I think about like their kids were 2 sport athletes, 3 sport athletes. So they're pretty active. Yeah. And so I just think of the parents too and all the money invested. And some parents might think, wow, that's not it. Sure. But it's all these great things. My younger niece, she just turned 5, I believe. Terrible uncle.
No, I get it.
And she started karate. And I did karate and my younger brother did karate. And the first thing that, because I like to consider myself a very self-disciplined person. Sure. But one of the things that they taught and talked about at the karate tournament was never do something for a child that a child can do for themselves. Yeah. Right. And so it teaches these things and extracurriculars. Right. And so I know we'll get into that, but I felt, based on your answer, I had to get into that. Our next question, and we talked a little bit about this offline, about the book, The Anxious Child, which leads me to this next question is, how does social media usage affect teenagers' self-esteem and stress levels? And just reading that gave me stress.
Yeah, totally. So again, the vulnerabilities of this developmental stage are what makes social media a little more risky for these kids. Studies show that social media definitely increases stress levels in teens. It interrupts sleep, which is not only going to make them more stressed out, it's also going to interrupt their development.
Right.
It can stunt's a big word, but it can get in the way of how they figure out how to manage those emotions or those moods.
Right.
And then we talk about self-image and self-esteem. All of those things in scientific studies are affected in social media for kids. Why? Very emotional, which again, we talked about this before. Emotion isn't bad. It's good. And going through these emotions are what help kids mature, right? So being very emotional is not a bad thing, but it means that they're more affected by what they see on a screen than one might be otherwise. And then again, we're tying this into my identity, who I am, what my values are. So they're more susceptible to what they're seeing in the opinions on social media that can cause those stresses. And then big one, sleep interruption, right? When we look at a screen at nighttime or when it's dark, our body thinks it's daytime. That's what happens when we look at light when it's dark. And that interrupts kids' sleep cycles, which not only affects their development physically, it directly ties into their mental well-being, right?
I feel like we could have an entire podcast episode based on that one question.
Yeah, definitely.
So, but I want to kind of dig into that a little bit. And referring back to the anxious child, right? They talked about how social media, like you said, right, stunts your ability to interact, control emotions, right?
Yeah.
Especially sleep. I think, part of the suggestions in the book, and of course I didn't read the book, I was listening to a podcast, but part of the suggestions by the author was to not let children under 14, so under freshman year, have a smartphone.
Yeah.
Which I thought today was crazy to me. But they talked about if you could just delay. If you as a parent or a caregiver can have the patience to delay, right? You are going to set up your child for such more success, right? And they still have flip phones. That's what I grew up with.
Yeah, me too.
I had the Nokia brick, and then in high school we had flip phones, which we thought were cool. It wasn't until again senior year where the first iPhone came out, and it blew me away. However, I didn't have enough money to buy it, so it was still in college when I had my first smartphone. But just thinking about the stresses, social media, I think how important the work that you and your organization is to the development of our teens.
Yeah. I mean, there are also pretty significant physical safety risks that come with social media as well.
Tell me more about that.
And by physical, I mean interacting with someone that could cause harm, right? Not just I'm looking at the screen and it's messing up my development, but I'm more impulsive because dopamine is higher and my receptors are higher when I'm a teen, which means I'm not thinking so much about cause and effect. I'm still learning how to do that. Which means maybe this person's nice and I'm going to chat with them online, and that's where we see kids get in trouble, or whether that's from having identity stolen to meeting someone in person. So there's that as well. So yeah, I think limits are really helpful. In terms of what that book says. I think one study I read talked about how part of the stunting for kids when it comes to social media is they're not having real life experience and interactions.
Correct.
So great. If we're not going to have a smartphone until 14, we can reframe as parents and say, but we are going to have a really real life interactions that teach you how to be human and learn these things, which I think is great.
You read my mind, because also in the book, through the podcast, of course, I need to stop acting like I read the book. But they talked about how parents feel less safe letting their kids play outside. Right? If we look at the 60s, 70s, and 80s, kids played outside, right? But if we look at crime rates were for child abductions were higher in the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Right.
And so what happened in the 90s, and they were talking about this in the podcast, was it was based on trust, not fact, right? So as a society, we trusted less. And so we have what we would call the hover parents, the helicopter parents, right? And so, but actually playgrounds were getting safer. What they argued though is that the internet, social media in general, is completely not safe, right? Without some safeguards, without some barriers. And so I think, as a parent today is, do I let my child play and I have these fears, right? And I don't want to call them irrational because
Sure.
child abductions have happened,
Sure.
right? But I have these fears based on something that I've seen or read or the news, but I don't necessarily have the same fears around social media because, and I feel it's because parents are on social media.
Yeah.
But the type of interactions, you might as well live in different worlds because the type of interactions that parents are having and children are having are night and day.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. And you as an adult are able to control that, but is your team.
Right, exactly. And we see that adults sometimes aren't great at it either.
No.
So if it's that hard for an adult, it's going to be even harder for a kiddo.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, we've been talking a lot about parents and family members and caregivers. This is the next question I have for you, which is what role do parental or guardian expectations and home environment play in teenage stress? So kind of shifting gears here from social media and internet, what do family dynamics essentially play in teenage stress?
Yeah. This question for me has two parts.
Okay.
I think part number one, which to me is more important, and I think a lot of what we're talking about right now is how to kind of understand more about what's going on for a teen to show empathy and more understanding. And so what a lot of conflict, from my understanding, not a therapist, also not a parent, but from my understanding, what I've seen in the world and even from my nieces and nephews at this age, comes from kids learning to be more independent, kids trying to decide who they are, figuring out what their values are, what are their priorities, and that doesn't always align with what mom and dad's priorities are. And so as they're trying to find that out, as they're trying to find a sense of self, when parents don't agree, not that they shouldn't agree, that's okay, or that they have to agree with them. It's okay not to agree with your kids, but that's going to cause more stress and more difficulty because their support system is not seeing eye to eye, if that makes sense. So that's one way that can increase stress with parents. Another way is that they're older, so we're expecting more of them, right? Yeah. And while that makes sense and that's necessary because they need to learn how to be adults, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have more responsibilities, sometimes we forget what's happening on the inside, which is there's a lot more emotional turmoil. They're learning a lot more. They're trying to decide make big questions, big decisions. Right. I've heard one therapist say they're renegotiating their relationship with their parents, right?
And some parents don't take lightly to that.
Yeah, and
I know my immigrant mom would never take that.
Right, and again, that's okay. These conflicts are part of growing up. It's important that we have them, and it's important that we as the adults in the scenario understand the level of weight this is carrying for a kid. It's not just that they're disagreeing with us. There's a lot going on internally and externally. And so the amount of times that we can have these conversations as parents around expectations, responsibilities, limits, with a mindset of, I'm here to support you no matter what, and you still have to take out the trash,
right.
That's going to help. That's going to help a lot. As long as kiddos know there's still going to be consequences, but my parents support me. They're not going anywhere. That's the biggest thing.
Well, I think of the stress as what it's like, because and you said something, right? You're not a parent, you're not a psychologist, but I by no means want to diminish your experience because you have dedicated your career to doing this, right?
Yeah.
And so I would argue that you are an expert.
Thank you.
Right? And so because you're in it, right? You're researching, you're practicing, you're interacting with kiddos the same way that we as educators are doing that, right?
Yeah.
Even if there's teachers out there who don't have kids, does that make them any less? No, absolutely not, right? Because you're interacting with them and you know in real time what is happening with teenagers.
Thanks.
But I think to go back to your point of what you were saying just now, I think teenagers and with sports, right? It's important to understand the stresses, right? When I was playing sports, there were times where, and I don't want to admit this, but there were times where we were mercy ruled in a game. And for those who don't know what that means, is if you are scored 10 or more goals within however long, they stopped the game right there. They said, all right, that's it, you've lost.
Yeah.
And it was one of the most embarrassing things. It was so stressful. It was so just not in a comfortable environment. But then we'd go out again the next week,
right,
and we'd win,
right,
and we'd mercy rule another team, right, and it went back like that. And I think those emotions that experience, right, children, teenagers are still trying to navigate that. And like you said, right, something that I want to ask you is what does culture have to do with this, right? Because my mom, immigrant, my dad, immigrant, right? They immigrated from Mexico. And so I was first generation born here in the US, but man, I might as well have been born in Mexico the way that I was raised, right? And so I'd come home from school with these ideas from my classmates and my parents weren't having that. So what does What does that look like culturally?
Yeah, that's a super important question, especially for kids who are immigrants or who haven't grown up in a culture that's different from the mainstream culture, right? Speaking of stress, right? When I was a teacher, we would have kids who at school, they're not white enough, for example, right? You don't speak English well.
Right.
There's a lot of pressure, not a lot of acceptance there. And they get home and they're not Mexican or they're not brown enough, right? Or even they go back to Mexico and they're like, you're too white, right? And so there's not, I mean, when we're talking about identity and learning, and I say this all the time when I talk to immigrants, is me as a citizen here, me as someone whose first language is English, I'm clearly a very white individual. I had these stresses as an adolescent, but immigrant kids, immigrant families, and you can apply this to other areas too, other identities too, have another extra piece of stress because of that identity and the culture we live in.
Because they're trying to fit in.
Because they're trying to fit in, and that is not their fault. First of all, a lot of immigrants think, well, it's my fault for coming here. No, that's the system we live in that's broken, and it's not okay. And the moment we can understand that, like, I have more stress for these reasons, and that makes sense, that's when we can start not only ourselves getting to feel better, but supporting kids. And like, of course you're more stressed out than these other kids. That's part of being an immigrant here, and that's not your fault. It's just something we have to walk through.
Yeah, we have to do it. I think if handled right and handled correctly, it'll build more emotionally intelligent children, right? More resilient children. I think I read a book, this time I did read it, that talked about how the immigrant mentality, you are naturally more resilient for that reason, right? Because you're navigating the normal life stresses on top of doing that in another country. You don't have support. You don't have your family. You didn't grow up there. You don't have the roots, the cultural roots, right? And you're trying to navigate that on top of laundry, meal prep, whatever that is you do, right? And it is stressful. I like to think that there are a lot of people out there who are living that right now. And so I like to give them a little more empathy, right? Because you don't know what they're going through, especially children, right? And so if they're still trying to develop how they feel, the chances are they're still trying to develop how they feel and then how to express it. Right? Well, Kat, I want to ask, and we touched up a little bit about this, and I think parents are going to get really interested in this. How can extracurricular activities both relive or rely on and contribute to stress in teenagers?
So you mentioned it, extracurricular activities are super helpful. Almost anyone would suggest that a teen or a kid have things to do outside of the home, out of school. Why? Because they have more opportunities to make friends. They have more opportunities to practice relationship, to be challenged, to learn, to find out what they like. They get to be more creative, or they get to be more active. It's always really helpful to be in extracurricular activities. And there can be other pieces that add to stress for kiddos as a part of those. That can come from pressure, high pressure competition in certain scenarios. Could come from expectations of parents or teachers or coaches, right, or mentors. And then we also have, this is a whole other group of friends that may or may not be more or less stressful depending on the interactions you're having with those friends. And so while they're good, while we would always suggest that kids be involved in extracurricular activities, it's important that parents also are aware of kind of the stress level around that activity and where that's coming from. Sometimes it just means, well, I as a parent am going to help put this in perspective for you. Like you said, you lost this game, there's going to be another game, right? Or you're playing soccer because you enjoy it so much and maybe it's not going as well as you want. Think about all the other things you have in your life that's going well and that you're still learning in soccer, right? Then there's the, okay, what activities can we do to help relieve your stress around this area? Big one for me, and I think for a lot of parents, is making sure that my support is not dependent on performance. So when you lose, I'm just as proud of you as when you win. When you get on the college team or when you get on the high school team, I'm just as proud of you as when you don't. Because these things are important to me because they're important to you, but they don't determine your value, right? And then from there we can decide, okay, what really is helpful. So an example for me is when I love soccer. I played soccer as a kid.
Great sport.
But once I hit freshman, sophomore year, 100 years ago in high school.
I don't believe that.
Not 100, not quite 100. Like I loved it. it ended up that the benefits of playing soccer and letting out all that energy,
Because there was too much pressure.
were not as beneficial as all the pressure I was getting, not just from my coach, but also from my friends. Like my friends would not like me as much if I made a mistake, right? And so my parents helped me walk through, not is this the sport you really want to do? Like we're starting to see that like this sport is actually more stressful than helpful. Maybe you want to look at something else. So I ended up running track instead, right?
Right.
And so that's not the answer for every kid, and we don't want to just remove them from hard situations, but as parents, being aware of how much stress those extracurricular activities are causing can help us support kids in better ways, especially because extracurricular activities should always be stress relieving, not the other way around, right?
Well, I have so many follow-ups to that. First, it's tough because in your example, right, I put myself in the parents' shoes. I feel that you're trying to create resilient students and people.
Yeah.
And so a lot of parents won't let their kids quit.
Right.
Right. And so it's tough navigating that.
Yes.
Because it's like, okay, well, clearly they're not enjoying it anymore. And I have a side story for you. When we were playing, about your friends not liking you, when we were playing soccer, we would play around. And if you made a mistake, you'd line up at the goal. About 10, 15 guys would stand there with soccer balls.
Yeah.
And they'd all pelt you with the soccer ball.
Yeah.
Right. And, you know, it improved their accuracy, but it also made you not want to do that.
Right.
But I also think it had adverse effects.
Yes.
For certain people, right, boiling water, which is the pressure in this example, makes an egg hard but softens a potato, right? And so I think for certain people that was not okay, and it created more stress. And how do you say that, right? Hey, friends of mine.
Yeah.
That's not cool.
Right.
Right. Because you're trying to fit in.
Yeah.
The whole thing, right?
Yeah, and the awareness of parents in that scenario may not be, well, we're going to stop playing soccer, but it may be, I'm going to talk to these kids and be like, what's another way you can help your friends get better versus pelting them with soccer balls? Again, because if kids are really struggling, or not struggling, but they're experiencing volatile emotions, and this is connected to identity, being pelted with a soccer ball by a bunch of friends, that's even a power dynamic, right? For mental health, that could be, for some kids, pretty damaging.
I'd like to say that now that I didn't partake.
Yeah, that's fair. No, not faulting anyone.
My question to you, a follow-up question, is there such a thing as good stress?
Yes, great question. A whole nother conversation.
Okay.
There are 3 types of stress.
Oh.
Positive stress.
Okay.
That's the stress that helps me get things done.
Yeah.
Helps me, it's normal, it's natural. Stress is not abnormal.
Motivator.
It's something we all feel, and it can help us get stuff done.
Okay.
That's positive stress. So scenarios like being stressed out about winning my soccer game can be positive, because it's gonna help me play better, and then when the game's over, my stress should go away. That's positive stress.
Okay.
There's tolerable stress, and that's when the stress is a little more, the reason stress is problematic, or can be, is because it increases the hormone cortisol. That hormone, literally, if in our bodies too long, starts to be toxic to our body, right?
Sure.
So tolerable stress, it's more of that hormone, which is starting to cause a little bit of damage in terms of, I'm not taking deep breaths anymore, I'm too stressed out, so I'm not getting the oxygen I need. My heart's beating quicker, so my blood isn't pumping the way it should. I may not be eating as well because I'm stressed out. I may not be sleeping well because I'm stressed out. That's gonna have physical effects.
Sure.
So it's tolerable. We like to think of it at DCAC like I'm stretching a rubber band.
Okay.
It stretches and it can go back when the stressor's over, but you start to see cracks in the rubber band, right? So it's
elasticity.
Yep. So
Right.
it's tolerable. I'm not going to break, but it is causing some damage, right?
Okay.
And I need to know how to manage that.
Right.
And then there's toxic stress, and that's more along the lines of trauma, where one event or multiple events literally change my body, my sense of control. Not my body, sorry, my brain, my sense of control. And that's when the rubber band breaks. So without support, we can't get back to that original state, right? And so, yes, we never want to say that stress is bad. Stress is good as long as it's positive stress, and that's why we talk about how support a lot of times moves that stress from tolerable or toxic to positive.
I'm glad you talked about that, and I'm glad you explained it, because I feel sometimes that stress motivates me quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think of like when I was in college, and I'm still in college now working on my master's, but it's that last 15 minutes before a deadline is coming up, where you are the most productive, I would say, and the stress of not completing it on time gets you, right?
Yeah.
And so, but going along with, thank you for explaining that there are 3 types. I had no idea, which goes on to my next question that I want to ask you, which is, how can adults, right, parents, caregivers, support young people with the stressors that we've been talking about throughout this show?
Yeah. So just for that exact reason, we know this idea of positive stress, we don't necessarily want to take kids out of stressful experiences, right?
They have to experience it.
They have to experience it. It's going to help them grow. It's a positive. It can be positive. And what makes it positive is stress. If you look at diagrams from therapists, kids who've been through trauma, a lot of the times their stress gets to be traumatic when they lose that support from a caregiver or a teacher or something like that.
So you're telling me, and we're, again, for our audience, we're not psychologists here.
Right.
But based on research, you can go through something traumatic, but as long as you have a support system, the likelihood of you overcoming it is higher?
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what the message is to parents, right? Whatever stress the child's going through, support is going to be the best way to help get them through that. And when I say support, I'm talking about emotional support. I'm not saying solve the problem for them or fix it. I'm saying I'm here to walk through this with you. I always think of it as like a stick, and we all know the saying, right? One stick breaks really easily, but 1 or 2 make it way harder to break any of the sticks. So to be that support to help carry that weight for kids is going to help them overcome that stress and that experience way better. When I say emotional, the reason I say emotional support is because, we talk about this a lot in my work as well. If I just throw money at a situation, it's going to solve it, then I'm going to be stressed out. But I don't have money to throw at the situation, right? Or a lot of times I can't solve the situation, but what I can do is be in the room with the child or with the person. And so that's where empathy comes in. And the idea of empathy is I'm putting myself in my child's shoes, right? So the first step there is I'm going to listen. What am I hearing? Second step is I'm going to reiterate what they're saying in their words, trying not to judge. Again, we like as TS or aunts and parents to solve the problem for them. We can't most of the time. And so instead of saying things like, don't be sad or it's okay, everything's fine, really repeat what you're hearing so they actually feel the support versus you're just trying to fix it and you're not listening to me, right? So, things that I would say are things like, I hear you saying that this test is really stressing you out, or what your friend said makes you sad. I'm really just repeating what they said. And then I'm going to validate that. I'm going to say, that makes sense. I would be stressed out about that test too, right?
Who wouldn't be?
Or that makes sense. That would make me sad or angry too, right? And so we're really just normalizing the fact that whatever emotion it is, it's okay to have. It's normal.
And then is there a call to action after that?
Yeah, so then you're going to talk through, okay, what can we do to help you relieve stress, right? Maybe it's resolving this with a friend. Maybe it's going for a walk because you've already studied 10 hours for the test, and maybe what you need is a walk versus studying more, it's 4 steps for empathy. 1, number 1 biggest thing, listen. 2, reiterate what you're hearing. 3, validate those emotions and what you're hearing. And then 4, okay, what's something that you can do, maybe not to solve the problem, but to help relieve stress.
Okay. You just touched on what I was going to ask you next, which was, what are the coping mechanisms that teenagers typically use to manage stress? Maybe give us an example of both positive and some negative. Great question. I think social media can be a way that kids and adults, if we're honest, use to manage stress, because it's easy to one, check out, but also we're increasing the dopamine level. So we're feeling good for a minute and ignoring other things that are going on. And so it's very easy to get attached or addicted to that for kids and for adults. I think a lot of, I think a lot about my own coping mechanisms as a kid when I was trying to keep myself safe when I was stressed out. And so maybe I would be mean to another kid because that makes me feel more safe. Or maybe I would do exactly what my teacher wanted because then they'll like me and then I'll be safe, right? So there's those types. In more extreme examples, you have alcohol, right? Kids trying to feel better using alcohol when they're older. These all sound like survival, like they're like war type survival stuff.
Yeah, and in the long run, they're only going to make the stress bigger. Yeah. So what we tend to talk about with any person, but especially kids, is there's two sides of relieving stress, or coping strategies is another way to say it. One is, what do you do on a daily basis that's healthy, that makes you feel good? So some kids like to listen to music, some kids like to dance, some kids like to write songs or draw, or
an outlet for something.
Do Zumba, go for a walk, kick the soccer ball around, those things that help them feel better on a day-to-day basis. both in the moment of stress will help, but even if we do it before we're stressed out, are going to make it harder for us to feel stressed in the moment. If that makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then there's as mentioned too in the introduction, there's also ways to practice mindfulness, which literally just calm the brain and the body down in the moment. Breathing.
Yes.
I have a therapist friend who will just name 5 things in the room real quick to kind of distract herself from her stress, and that helps her calm down. Or name 5 things in some category, like quick, name 5 movies, and then just name 5 movies, or name 5 fruits and vegetables. There's also visualizing. They can visualize a safe place, the beach or the mountains, things like that, a safe place at home. And then utilizing those 5 senses is a great way to really be present and calm the body down. So what do you see? What are you hearing? Just really focus on that sound or that smell for a few minutes, kind of thing.
I think it's, I don't know if this is the term, right? But I think it's self-serving to give into the emotion that you're feeling.
Yeah.
Because it makes you feel better momentarily.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is another book I did read around rumination.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. Which is a term that I recently learned through this book, and I found myself ruminating a lot about certain situations which would translate into like just overthinking.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. And so in the book, they talked about breathing. They talked about how changing your chemical imbalance in your body. So they said, stick your face into ice cold water because that will create a reaction in your body, like survival mode.
Yeah.
Right. And so you literally are thinking about surviving instead of thinking about what you're ruminating over.
Yep.
Right. And so I think these are great practices for relieving stress,
Totally,
right?
yeah.
I know as a kid, and I'm guilty of this, is I turned to food. Food was great comfort for me. And not so much social media. I don't know, maybe I missed that boat, but I know that a lot of students today really turn to social media for that dopamine hit. But then if the interactions aren't positive, it's just a vicious cycle.
Yeah.
You know, more stress. You can't get rid of it. What you're trying to use to de-stress is causing you stress.
Right.
And therefore you use it more, and then it causes more, and you'll never get out of that loop. You gotta break it.
Yeah.
Well, Kat, before I let you go, what are some resources that we can provide our families with today? Some of our students that are listening, is there a website, a phone number, building? What can we give them?
Yeah. So as we mentioned in the beginning, we support kids who've been through more, I like to say like worse or bigger.
Significant.
Yeah, significant. Yes. Not that, for example, we can support a lot with abuse and neglect. We can support a lot with kids who've been through immigration trauma, whether in another country or here. We can support with domestic violence. If the family's going through divorce, for example, that is 100% a trauma. It's just not the level of trauma that we can support. And so we have to reserve our therapy for those kind of things, something a little more traumatic, for lack of a better term.
So you're like an emergency room versus an urgent care.
Yeah. A little longer term than emergency. But for sure. So I would always suggest Yo Importo or I Matter, which is the statewide therapy for kids ages, I believe it's 8 to 18, and then a little older if they have disabilities. That's more for mainstream. I'm going to deal with this stress before it gets too big for me to deal with, and therapy there. So that's really helpful. And families can just Google I Matter. Really easy little application they can fill out. If parents have questions for me, my number is 720-974-7234. Our website is www.denvercac.org. And then, I think there's a lot of, if families are looking for ways to connect in the community around this and talk more around relationship building and things like that, feel free to give me a call. We know of a lot of orgs that do that in the Denver metro area.
Kat, I want to thank you for coming onto the show today and for talking about a topic that I think is really relevant in today's educational society, right? We serve students of Denver, and so do you, and that's your expertise. And so I'm just really appreciative of you coming onto the show today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I think I love doing this ahead of time, right? Before a kid's really struggling with something, being able to talk to parents about this is how we support them. So thank you for giving us that opportunity.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for joining us.
Yeah.
Well, friends and families, this concludes our EDUCA DPS podcast for today. A big thank you goes out to our guest, Kat Lovejoy, again, great last name, for sharing this important information. I'd like to ask all of you to please share this content, right? If you found it helpful or you think it might be helpful for someone else, best way is to share it, right? You can find it on YouTube at Denver Public Schools Plus. You can also find all of our other multimedia productions like this podcast and our other shows. You can also find us on all major podcast platforms. All you have to do is search for Denver Public Schools Podcast Network. We want to lead with gratitude here on the EDUCA studio, so our gratitude goes out to the entire communications department, and also a big thank you to our proud superintendent of Denver Public Schools, Dr. Alex Marrero, for his continued support of the EDUCA DPS podcast and all of our multimedia productions. Don't forget to tune in into our next EDUCA DPS podcast, where we continue the learning journey. And please remember to tell your children more often, I believe in you and I know you can do it. I'm Javier Ibarra. Until next time.